What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the Rodney Reed case and go over the celebrity and social justice activist driven propaganda campaign that seeks to free Rodney Reed. Now for those of you who don't know, Rodney Reed is scheduled to be executed on November 20th of 2019 for the rape and murder of 19-year-old Stacey Stites. Rodney Reed was convicted of this murder based on DNA evidence that linked him to the crime. But recently, key facts in the Rodney Reed case have been called into question by the Innocence Project, a celebrity-driven campaign to free Rodney Reed, and the usual suspects in social justice activism that typically get behind cases like this to prove some kind of systemic or systematic racism inherent in the criminal justice system. And according to this campaign, not only is there reasonable doubt on whether or not Rodney Reed raped and murdered Stacey Stites, but in fact, they have discovered who the real killer is, and that real killer, according to this campaign, is Jimmy Fennell, a police officer who was actually engaged to Stacey Stites at the time of her murder. Now, while it's important to note that this campaign supposedly has a lot of evidence pointing to Jimmy Fennell as the real killer, the case against Jimmy Fennell completely falls apart when you stop ignoring evidence that's inconvenient to that case and start examining it as a whole. So in this video, I'm going to go over the misinformation campaign surrounding the Rodney Reed case and point out all of the key evidence that is just not being reported on by celebrities, the Innocence Project, and people with the vested interest in freeing Rodney Reed. Now, one of the bases for the theory that Jimmy Fennell is the real killer of Stacey Stites is Rodney Reed putting forward the idea that the reason his semen was found in Stacey Stites is because he was having a consensual affair behind the back of Jimmy Fennell, and they actually slept together consensually a couple of days before Stacey Stites turned up dead. So Jimmy Fennell must have found out about the affair, and in a rage that his fiancée was cheating on him, and cheating on him with a black man nonetheless, Jimmy Fennell decided that he had to kill Stacey Stites. Now, another big tenet of the Rodney Reed campaign is implying, if not outright saying, that the police never really investigated the possibility that Jimmy Fennell was the murderer, and the reason they didn't investigate that Fennell was the murderer is because he was a cop, and maybe some of those people had to have been in on it or were covering for him in some way. And basically, the conspiracy just keeps getting bigger and bigger. You see, through a large portion of the investigation, Jimmy Fennell was the primary suspect. And the reason why he was the primary suspect is because anytime somebody's fiancé is found dead, obviously that person is going to be investigated as the primary suspect. Not to mention that Jimmy Fennell and Stacey Stites were living together, and Jimmy Fennell was likely the last person known to investigators to have seen Stacey Stites alive at that point. However, the more the investigators put their focus on Jimmy Fennell, the more it became obvious that Jimmy Fennell could not have committed the murder of Stacey Stites. And let me tell you why. Number one, Stacey Stites' mother, Carol Stites, lived below Jimmy and Stacey in the apartment right by the staircase that Stacey Stites would have had to have walked down to every time she wanted to go to work in the morning. Carol, being a worrisome mother, would actually stay up until 3 a.m. to hear Stacey going down the stairs and leaving for work to make sure that A, she was getting to work on time, and B, because she was worried about her daughter leaving at 3 a.m. to go start a shift at 3:30 a.m. The next problem with the theory that Jimmy Fennell was the murderer of Stacey Stites is that Jimmy and Stacey only had one car, and Stacey had taken that car to go to work. Now, even if you discount Stacey Stites' mother hearing her leave for work like she normally did every day, and you somehow believe that Jimmy Fennell managed to sneak Stacey Stites' body down this staircase right in front of Stacey's mother's home, loaded her into the car, and then drove out to dump the body, there's still not enough time for Jimmy to dump the body, dump the car at the high school in the town where Stacey worked, and then make his way back home to Giddings, Texas, in order to receive the phone call about Stacey being missing at 6:45 a.m. In order for Fennell to have done it, he would have had to dump Stacey's car at Bastrop High School, which is about 35 miles away from his home, and make an 8-hour walk or maybe a 6-hour run if he was hustling. So already we have a problem, because there's no way that between 3 a.m. and 6:45 a.m. Jimmy could have dumped the body, then drove to the high school, dumped the car, and walked back that 35 miles. But it's actually worse, because when you examine the timeline of events, it gets narrower, it doesn't get broader, because somebody delivering newspapers in the area where Stacy's body was found actually drove past the area, and they told investigators that they did not see the body at 4 a.m. when they passed by on their normal paper route. So Stacy would have had to have been dumped sometime after 4 a.m., which shaves another hour off the timeline. Also, the car was left at the high school when nobody was supposed to be at the high school. So a patrol car officer actually saw the car in the high school parking lot at about 5:23 a.m. And he took note of the fact that he saw this car, because on his previous patrol through the area, he did not see that car. So given the frequency of the officer's patrol, we had a 45-minute to maybe an hour window where the car could have been dumped at the high school in between officer patrol. Now, even despite all this, despite the fact that Stacy Stites' mother says that she heard her daughter leaving for work at the normal time that she leaves for work, despite the fact that the person delivering the newspapers drove by the place where the body was dumped and said that there was no body there at 4 a.m., and despite the fact that the officer only discovered Stacy's car parked in the parking lot of the high school at 5:23 a.m., and it was really unlikely that Officer Fennell could have ran all the way back home 35 miles to receive a call from Stacy's mother after she received a call about Stacy being missing at 6:45 a.m., the police still continue to investigate Fennell as the primary suspect. The lead investigator went over taxi cab records to determine whether or not Jimmy Fennell took a cab back home. He checked out Jimmy Fennell's friends and checked their alibis and found no holes in their alibi. And he went to the Giddings Police Department where Jimmy Fennell worked, and he checked the mileage report of all the police cars that the department had on hand. All of this yielded nothing, so eventually, when it became clear that it was impossible for Jimmy Fennell to commit the crime, he was excluded as a suspect by the lead investigator. Now, in the following 11 months, police investigated about 28 different male suspects. They were getting tips from all over the area, because HEB, Stacy's employer, actually offered a $50,000 reward to anybody who had information that could lead to an arrest in the Stacy Stites murder case, but they still could not find the killer. Now, despite the fact that investigators were incredibly thorough and they compared about 28 different DNA samples to the semen that they found within Stacy, they interviewed all of her high school friends to find any leads. 11 months passed by and they still had nothing. They had no answer on whose semen it was, and no hint that it could have possibly been Rodney Reed. That was until Rodney Reed was identified as a suspect in an attempted rape by the victim of that attempted rape, in an assault that seemed extremely similar to what possibly happened to Stacy Stites. Now, according to this accuser, Reed approached her in a parking lot at around 3 a.m. that he was known to frequent, and asked her for a ride home.
We were probably about 11:30 with a friend of mine, drove to Bastrop. I wasn't familiar with the place at all. So I saw the closest lit up gas station, and I took my car to a payphone there. And when I was using the payphone through my car window, a gentleman came in front of my car, and I jumped, and he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." I was like, "That's okay." And I proceeded to use the phone through my car. And then that's when he said, "Hey, do you think you can give me a ride?" So I was like, "Where do you live?" And he said, "On Main Street." And in my mind, Main Street's this big lit up road. So I was like, "Oh, well, how far?" And he said, "A mile or two." And I was like, "Okay, I'll give you a ride."
After Reed talked her way into the car and they began driving, the woman started to feel uneasy as Reed kept giving her directions to more isolated parts of town. And at one point, she actually refused to go down a dirt road for fear of her safety.
So we go down the road, and he said, "You're going to take a left down there on a dirt road." And I said, "No." I started feeling really uncomfortable. And I said, "I'm not taking my car down a dirt road." And he said, "You're not?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Why not?" And I was like, "I'm just not taking my car down a dirt road." He said, "Well."
According to this accuser, Reed then propositioned her for sex. She refused, and Reed began violently attacking her.
He starts to get out and he gets back in, and he said, "Don't I get a hug?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Don't I get a hug?" I said, "I gave you a ride. Don't screw me over. Get out." And the next thing I know, he has me by the back of my hair, slamming my face on my steering wheel. I'm punching backwards, and I open the door. I screamed so loud that I peed my pants. And I asked him, I was like, what do you want? What the hell do you want from me? And he said, I want a blowjob. And I said, you'll have to kill me before you get anything from me.
So this attempted violent assault that happened 6 months after Stacey Stites was murdered, that lines up really well with the circumstances of Stacey Stites' death. That was extremely close to the same exact route that Stacey would have driven through in order to get to work, and happened around the same exact time that Stacey's murder happened 6 months earlier, obviously led investigators to speculate that there might be a connection between the two. They also matched Reed's DNA to another woman who was raped 6 months earlier and was unable to identify her attacker. And on top of that, Reed lived just half a mile away from where the car was dumped. So they compared a sample of Rodney Reed's DNA that they had on file due to another sexual assault case to the DNA found in Stacey's body, and they found that that DNA actually matched. Now, the police knew that Reed's DNA matched the DNA found in Stacey Stites before they ever interviewed him, and when they asked him if he knew Stacey Stites, he denied it. And in fact, he wrote a statement out saying that he didn't know Stacey, he never met her, and then he signed that statement. Now, during the course of the trial, Reed decided that he needed to change up his story from his initial statement. So instead of going with the defense that he doesn't know anything about Stacey because, his DNA was found on Stacey's body, he decided to go with the defense that he was Stacey's secret boyfriend. And the reason Reed, I can imagine, decided to go with this defense is because this was the exact defense he used to beat a 1987 rape charge. He, in that case, convinced the jury that he was that alleged victim's secret boyfriend, and therefore, he could not have possibly raped her because they were together. Apparently, everybody wanted to be with Rodney Reed, but they all wanted to keep it on the DL. Now, Reed's team did attempt to produce a witness to confirm that Reed and Stacey were having a romantic affair in secret, and they produced a friend of Reed's parents named Lindley, who said that one time she saw a white woman pull up in a gray truck, walk up to Reed's house when she was sitting on her porch, and asked Reed's mother if Rodney was home. And when she was informed that Rodney wasn't home, she said, well, tell Rodney that Stephanie came by. So we have a witness who gave the wrong name and the wrong color car, and upon cross-examination, acknowledged that she had no particular knowledge that there was a romantic relationship between the woman that she saw that might be Stacey and Rodney Reed. That was just her impression from this woman showing up to the door. Also, neither Reed nor the defense team showed any phone records or any type of way that these two were communicating while they were supposedly having a months-long secret relationship. In fact, at one point, I saw Reed saying that he was taking calls from Stacey at a payphone at this other market, but there's no records from the landlines that Stacey would have called from to that payphone. Now, the biggest dispute and the source of the most misinformation surrounding this case surrounds the forensic evidence, and specifically the semen evidence found in Stacey Stites' body. And to be fair to the Reed defense team, the forensic experts for the state have all slightly altered their testimony surrounding the DNA evidence, and that slight alteration in their testimony revolves around the time frame that the DNA could have been deposited under. At trial, some of the forensic experts for the state gave testimony that indicated that the semen left by Reed in Stacey's body could have only been left within a 24 to 26 hour window. Now, this was in fact erroneous testimony, and the experts that testified in the trial have corrected that testimony, saying that it was actually within 72 hours. So it still could have been within 24 hours of her murder, but that time frame isn't exactly or cut off at 24 or 26 hours. It extends all the way to 72 hours. Now, contrary to popular belief, this timeline presented by the state was disputed at trial by the defense's own forensic expert. But facts are facts. The state said that sperm cells only retain their tails for about 24 to 26 hours, and we know now from science and from those experts' revised testimony that that window could be expanded to 72 hours. Now, a lot of people have latched onto this piece of evidence, pointing out that Rodney Reed said that he and Stacey slept together a couple of nights before the murder, and now we know for sure that the existence of the sperm cell tails does not exclude that possibility. And yeah, if you stopped right there and didn't examine any more evidence from that point on, then that probably provides enough reasonable doubt to get Rodney Reed's death sentence commuted and potentially give him a new trial where he would likely win. Honestly, I think this could provide enough reasonable doubt on its own to free Rodney Reed. However, there's something that Kim Kardashian, Dr. Phil, Rihanna, all these celebrities and social justice activists tend to leave out at this point in the case, and that's the other DNA evidence. You see, they didn't just find Rodney Reed's DNA in the form of semen inside Stacey's body, which hypothetically, theoretically, could have been left a couple of days prior, which would line up with Rodney Reed's account of events that he hooked up with Stacey a couple of days before she died. They also found Rodney Reed's DNA in the form of saliva across Stacey's chest. Now, you might be confused because you probably never heard that fact, because that fact is always, and I mean always, left out. It's left out by celebrities, it's left out by social justice activists, left out by the Innocence Project, left out by Dr. Phil, and it's left out by every dopey true crime podcast that covered this story that sourced the same Intercept article as everyone else. But when you stop going off of whatever you hear in the media and you actually look into the original source documents, you'll find it there plain as day that there was DNA in the form of saliva across Stacey's chest, and that DNA was a match for Rodney Reed. Now, why is this so significant? Because while semen evidence can be maintained even if the person showers after having sexual intercourse for a couple of days inside the body, the same is not true for saliva across the chest. Stacey would have had to have not showered after her alleged consensual sexual encounter with Reed from a couple of days before her body was found in order for that DNA to be maintained. On top of that, the saliva was wet. That's how the forensic investigators noticed it. So she would have also had to have preserved wet spit across her chest in order for the forensic guys to see it, to then sample it, and then test it against Rodney Reed. Which means that Rodney Reed was with Stacey Stites a lot closer to her time of death than he indicates that he was. Now look, I understand that there are a lot of people who are supporting Rodney Reed and this push for at least a stay on execution just on the grounds that they are against the death penalty. I mean, the Innocence Project, even though they're named the Innocence Project, should really be called the Anti-Death Penalty Project, because this is what they do. And one of the things that they have to do to try and get a stay of execution and extend somebody's life is provide an alternate theory or an alternate explanation for the facts of the case. But if you're going to argue the death penalty on a moral level, which means whether or not the death penalty is right or wrong morally under any circumstances, or on a practical level under the idea that sometimes we're going to execute innocent people and it's not worth it to execute the guilty if we're also executing some innocent people, that's one thing. But don't buy into the hype that all these celebrities are putting forward. Be smarter than that. Go into the details of the case. I know it was difficult on this case in particular because the mainstream media flooded the Google searches with all their misinformation about how Rodney Reed is innocent and how all these new witnesses have come forward, even though these witnesses are not giving any new information that wasn't public in the media. And a lot of them, including the one that everybody cites as Stacey's coworker, didn't come forward with information about Reed until 20 years later, and she claims to be Stacey's friend and confidant even though she worked in a place and had to have known that her place of work was offering $50,000 for a lead on the Stacey Stites murder.
There was one instance where we were having lunch in the break room together, and it was just the two of us, and she pretty much was confiding in me. We were talking about her engagement ring, and I was like, oh, are you so excited to get married? And she said she really wasn't so excited to get married, and quickly followed that with saying that she was actually sleeping with a black guy named Rodney, and that she was, not sure what her fiance would do if he found out, and she had to be pretty careful about it. So she wasn't really excited about getting married because she was sleeping with a black dude named Rodney, she said.
I mean, seriously, do you really buy this account of a conversation from 20 years ago that just so happens to include every crucial detail that she never came forward even though the job that she was working at was offering $50,000 for this information? I asked my really close friend who often confided in me that I would have had to have known was already engaged and getting married about her engagement ring and whether or not she was happy about getting married, and she said, no, I'm not happy about getting married. I'm actually sleeping with the black man named Rodney, and I'm really worried about how my evil white racist cop husband is gonna feel about that.
I had big regret that I didn't come out in the beginning and say anything. And then I just didn't realize that what I had to say meant so much in this case, because if that's what it came down to, yeah, they were having an affair. She told me. I thought more people knew about it as well. So, I 100% remember everything about that conversation. And she was scared.
Again, 11 months of knowing that her coworker and friend and confidant was murdered and that her place of employment is offering $50,000 for information that could lead to an arrest in her murder, and she just keeps this to herself.
In a way. And then she was also super happy because she's sleeping with this guy named Rodney, and I didn't know who Rodney was, didn't know who Jenny was. So, I have zero affiliation to either one of them. I'm not a family member. All I knew was Stacy from work. And all I know is what she told me. And that's all I can, I stand by my word with that.
Even though she had one conversation that supposedly had all the information that she needed to collect that $50,000.
Because if that was the only thing that convicted him, and I had no idea about any of the other stuff, if just that was a reason why he was convicted, then that's not true, and I needed to say something because Stacy physically sat there and told me she was sleeping with him. I never saw them together. I never saw him, but I knew what she told me, so I knew it had some implication in the case.
Once again, all the information she needed from just one conversation with Stacy in order to collect $50,000 for 11 months when she was the only person on planet Earth that knew about the connection between Stacy and Rodney, and she never comes forward until 20 years later when all of this alleged connection is out in the public and prominent in the media. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. If you want to support me, you could do so via one-time donation on Venmo or PayPal, or you can do so monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. Also have a Teespring store, promo code DUMBPROMO for 10% off. This has been me talking about the Rodney Reed case. Till next time.